I'm Clara, 32, and despite 5 years of being engaged to Daniel, I'd always felt like I was living in the shadow of my family's expectations. Last New Year's Day at our annual brunch, I thought things might be different. My parents were hosting, and I'd brought my favorite cinnamon rolls, freshly baked, gooey, topped with cream cheese frosting. I envisioned warmth, laughter, maybe even a genuine compliment. Instead, as everyone gathered around the dining table, I began to describe how Daniel and I had started planning our wedding, imagining a simple backyard ceremony in early spring. My father, Charles, raised his coffee mug, smiled broadly, and said, "If you marry, we'll be forgotten." The table fell silent for a beat, and then the tension broke with forced chuckles. My mother laughed, too loudly, clinking her spoon against the rim of her teacup. My sister Brooke slipped a sympathetic look my way, but no one dared challenge him. I just lifted a cinnamon roll, met his gaze, and said, "Challenge accepted." That night, I packed a suitcase and moved out. If you're already curious about us, how a single joke could tip me over the edge, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe to find out what happened when I reappeared a year later. Daniel and I met during our senior year at university. I was finishing my degree in nutrition, balancing part-time work at a local farmer's market. He was completing his engineering degree at the same school. One crisp autumn morning, I'd set up my produce stand under a canopy of orange leaves. He wandered over, drawn by the display of heirloom apples I'd arranged. We fell into conversation about my favorite heirloom varieties, Cortland, Empire, Honeycrisp, while he explained fluid dynamics with animated hand gestures. Our friendship blossomed over shared coffees, study sessions in the campus library, and evening walks through the quad when the air smelled of wood smoke. By December, he asked for my number on a napkin at the campus cafe. A week later, I asked him to join me at the holiday potluck, and before I knew it, I was sharing my last bag of homemade granola with him under festive lights. By graduation, we were inseparable. He proposed 3 months later with a simple gold band I'd chosen myself, set with a tiny emerald from my grandmother's jewelry box. I was ecstatic, convinced our love could weather anything. When I invited my parents to dinner to share the news, my mother exclaimed with delight. But my father merely nodded and said, "That's wonderful, dear. But remember, one day you might be starting a family of your own, and we might be just a chapter you've outgrown." I forced a smile and said, "I'll always be your daughter." But his words lingered like a cold draft. My family had always prided itself on tradition. The Langstons were the sort of people who hosted a New Year's brunch every January 1st, complete with freshly squeezed mimosas, quiches from the local bakery, and a detailed seating chart. My father, a real estate developer who'd built neighborhoods in our small town, was used to orchestrating every detail, down to which cousin sat next to which aunt. My mother, Evelyn, volunteered on every local board and coordinated charity fundraisers. My younger sister, Brooke, was the star athlete, the golden girl on the high school track team, now a young attorney hired by the prestigious firm my father helped found. They loved me, but they expected me to follow a particular path. Get married, have kids, keep the family name alive. I'd grown up knowing the value of hard work. My mother returned to nursing when I was 12 after Dad's business boomed, leaving me and Brooke with a strict bedtime and a chore chart pinned to the fridge. I learned to make dinner at 14, learned to balance the household bills as soon as I started babysitting. My childhood bedroom was a patchwork of fortune corners, hand-me-down furniture that still held the warmth of my grandmother's woodworking, second-hand quilts stitched by neighbors. When I entered college, I was the first Langston to branch out, studying nutrition, working at the farmer's market, volunteering at the community food bank. I loved it, but every holiday drive home, I'd feel the weight of my family's expectations settle on my shoulders. When I first told my parents I wanted to work for a nonprofit after graduation, focusing on food insecurity, my mother hemmed and hawed. "That's admirable, dear, but be mindful of your long-term career prospects." My father frowned and said, "Charity is fine, but charity without structure won't pay for a mortgage." I brushed off their comments, convinced I could prove them wrong. After university, Daniel accepted a job in Chicago with an engineering firm. I applied for a position with a large food research organization in Seattle. We talked about long distance for months, flying back and forth. Eventually, by summer, I moved into a small apartment near downtown Seattle. Leaving my parents' home had felt exhilarating, like I'd broken free of a gilded cage. Daniel and I rented side-by-side studios, celebrated our first apartment with homemade meals cooked on tiny electric burners, and dreamed of building a life together, blending his stability with my passion for community work. During that fall, I applied for a grant to start a small community garden in South Seattle. I spent weekends meeting with local organizers, crafting proposals, and recruiting volunteers. Back in my hometown, life continued under Dad's watchful eye. He'd told my sister that if she married, she'd take over the family's legal department and help expand the law firm regionally. Appointments and family dinners resumed with him at the head of the table, hands clasped in his customary steeple. My mother floated among the guests, offering plates of quiche and scones, all arranged perfectly. My sister, now employed at the firm, had already visited the house to pull out a dress for the New Year's brunch. But even as I built my life in Seattle, I still called home every Sunday, updating them on my garden's progress, offering to help with Mom's charity board logistics via video call. Then came the invitation for New Year's brunch at my parents' house. A formal card arrived in mid-December. The Langstons cordially invite you to ring in the new year at a festive brunch on January 1st. I debated whether I should attend. I'd returned home only a handful of times all year. There were whispered rumors in town. Clara's chasing hippie dreams again. Dad's disappointed she's not on track to join the firm. I worried I couldn't handle another sideways glance from Dad. But Daniel convinced me, go. Show them what you've built. I'll be visiting in February. Think of this as your chance to shine. On New Year's Eve, I baked my grandmother's cranberry-orange muffins, her secret recipe from when she'd taught me in that cramped kitchen long before I left for college. I tracked how many eggs I had, measured cups of sugar with precision, and mixed in a swirl of homemade orange zest marmalade. At 10 p.m., I FaceTimed Mom and Brooke. My mother fussed over how cold it was in Seattle, told me I should get a warmer coat for the drive back. Brooke beamed at me through the screen, holding a bottle of sparkling cider to celebrate. I held up my muffins and said, I hope they'll like these tomorrow. Brooke said, they'll love them, though Dad will probably find something to critique. I laughed and said, I'm ready. We'll see. The next morning, I drove the familiar winding highways toward home. Snowflakes dusted my windshield, and I turned on my old college playlist, songs that reminded me of simpler times. I felt a flutter of anticipation in my chest, like a dancer before going on stage. Parking in the driveway behind our family sedan, I carried my muffin tray into the kitchen. The moment I opened the front door, warmth and the scent of honey-baked ham greeted me. My mother emerged from the dining room wearing a pastel silk scarf and pearls. Darling, you look wonderful, she cooed, directing me toward the side counter. We've laid out pastries, fruit, everything. I set my tray on the marble island, and Dad stepped around the corner, dressed in his crisp linen blazer, holding a glass of freshly poured mimosa. He smiled at me, just a small lift of his lips, and said, Good morning, sweetheart. I offered him a muffin, and he took it, breaking it open to reveal the bright orange streaks of cranberry and zest. These smell divine, he said, but then he paused, eyes narrowing slightly. He bit into the muffin, swallowed, and said, They taste delicious. But let's talk about your future. If you marry, we'll be forgotten. The words landed like an ice cube on my chest. My hand stilled mid-reach for the cinnamon sugar bowl. The adults around the table paused. Aunt Marge stopped pouring coffee, my uncle's fork hovered over his eggs, and my sister's eyes dropped to the floor. My mother's perfectly arranged eyebrows tightened for a split second. I felt my face flush, but I clenched my jaw, set my shoulders, and picked up my fork. Challenge accepted, I said quietly, but firmly. I noticed my voice tremble slightly, but I held his gaze until he looked away. He just raised an eyebrow and said, Well then, let's eat. Conversation resumed. Light chatter about the weather, the neighbor's new landscaping, but my father's words echoed at the edge of every exchange. I felt small, like a debutante on her first dance being judged by everyone watching from the walls. I refilled my coffee cup and forced myself to smile at my mother when she asked if I needed more syrup on my pancakes. I told myself that I'd stay calm, that I'd leave later without making a scene. But inside, something cracked. The brunch passed in a blur of polite smiles and muted laughs. I offered to help clear plates, but my mother waved me off. When Dad rose to refill his glass, he bumped the table, nearly knocking my plate onto the floor. He glanced at me with that same faint smile, as if testing my reaction. I sat frozen until he turned back. I felt a wave of vertigo, half disbelief, half anger. I realized in that moment that no matter how many muffins I baked or how many community gardens I launched, I could never be enough in his eyes. After brunch, I helped my mother fold tablecloths. My sister joined us, her voice hushed as she asked if I was okay. I said, "I'm fine," but my lips trembled. My brother-in-law led Brooke away to admire his new watch collection, so I was left with my mother and my thoughts. When she asked if I'd considered applying for that job in Bellevue, I snapped. "Why bother? You'd rather I stayed in Seattle gardening than helping with your charities." She flinched at my tone but didn't respond. I gathered my coat, gave her a quick hug, and said, "Happy New Year?" She looked at me, tears shining in her eyes, and whispered, "I'm so sorry." I walked out the door without looking back. The drive back to Seattle felt surreal, like I was in a dream. Snow obscured the road, and I kept the heater on high, pressing my hands to the steering wheel. As I crossed the state line, I felt a cold release inside me, part heartbreak, part exhilaration. I arrived at my apartment that night to a voicemail from Daniel. "Hey babe, I'll be at home late working on the new project. Call me when you get in. Love you." I called him immediately and said, "I'm not coming back." He asked, "What do you mean?" I said, "Tonight, I moved. Out of my parents' house, permanently. I can't keep playing their game." He paused, then whispered, "I understand. I'll come visit in a week. Do you need anything?" I said, "Just sleep. I feel like I haven't slept in years." Then I hung up and stared at my packed dishwasher for a long time before collapsing into bed. The following morning, I woke with a pounding head and a sense of vertigo. My suitcase from my parents' house sat in the hallway, half unpacked. I had a list of tasks: change my mailing address, freeze my parents' credit card just in case, update my resume. But all I could think about was that final image of my father's face as he said, "If you marry, we'll be forgotten." The sting of those words felt like a brand. I poured coffee and dialed my best friend Avery. "I did it," I said before she could even say hello. "I moved out." Avery exclaimed, "Clara, that's incredible. I'm on my way." 2 hours later, she arrived at my apartment with her car loaded with boxes of my books, my kitchenware I'd left behind when I moved, and a casserole dish of lasagna. I flung my arms around her, tears streaming. She said, "You're not alone in this. You never will be." Over the next week, Daniel flew in. We spent evenings in my living room, packing my things more deliberately. Framed photos of my community garden, my grandmother's wooden cutting board, my laptop with my proposals and grant applications. I transferred my joint bank account shares into a new account in my name only, closed the credit card I'd used to help pay for Dad's wedding gift, and typed up a simple letter for my parents. "I need space to find out who I am outside of your expectations. I'm focusing on my career and my relationship with Daniel. Please respect my choice and do not contact me for now." I left the letter on the kitchen table in my parents' house and walked away without looking back. In the weeks that followed, my phone exploded with texts. "Where are you? Are you okay? Your mother is worried. Your father is upset." I answered none of them. Daniel held me gently during tear-soaked nights. He assured me that I was building something worthwhile in Seattle. He took me to his office and introduced me to his colleagues, who asked me about my garden work. He told them, "Clara just created a community garden in South Seattle. She's amazing." Their genuine curiosity made me realize how my parents had always brushed off my achievements as cute hobbies. I found a therapist who specialized in family estrangement, and we met weekly. During one session, Dr. Harris said, "Your father's joke was the catalyst. It crystallized years of feeling unseen." I nodded, tears in my eyes. "I thought I deserved it," I whispered. "You deserved far more," she said. By spring, I had secured a grant for my community garden, enough to pay for raised beds, soil, and tools. I also started teaching a weekend nutrition class at a local community center. My schedule filled up. Monday garden meetings, Tuesday evening classes, Wednesday office hours at the nonprofit I'd joined, Thursday one-on-one mentorship sessions with students, and nights spent writing grant proposals. I made new friends. Stephanie, who ran the local food pantry, Marcus, a carpenter who built the garden beds, and Elena, a photographer who documented our harvests. I found myself waking up earlier than ever, energized by a sense of purpose I'd never known. Meanwhile, my parents' New Year's brunch invitation arrived again in mid-December, tucked inside a neatly addressed envelope in my old mailbox. I stared at the card. "The Langstons cordially invite you," and felt a flicker of dread. But I set the invitation aside and focused on my progress. My garden had produced enough produce to donate 50 pounds of vegetables to families in need. I'd spoken at a local health fair about food deserts. I'd even been interviewed by a Seattle radio station to discuss urban gardening. I was building a reputation on my own merits. Then, one day in January, exactly 1 year after Dad's joke, I received an unexpected email. "Designer needed for community outreach campaign, Langston Development Group." The subject line made my stomach drop. I clicked it open to find a brief from Westwood Creative. Langston Development is launching a new initiative to improve urban green spaces in the region. We are seeking a graphic designer to revamp promotional materials and community newsletters. Initial meeting next week if interested. Langston Development. My father's company. I stared at the screen, heart hammering. I leaned back in my chair, willing my breath to steady. I called Avery. "Langston wants to hire me for their community outreach. Do I accept?" She asked, "Does the brief mention your history with them?" I said, "No, just that they want a local designer who knows community gardens." She paused, then said, "Clara, if you can do the work and they don't know it's you, it might be a chance to show them what you're capable of." I hesitated. My chest tightened. What if they realized? What if Dad looked at my work and felt pride? Or something else? But Avery's voice softened. "You've earned this, whether or not they accept you. Your skills matter." I exhaled and replied, "Okay, I'll apply." Over the next few days, I prepared my portfolio, crisp layouts of the community garden flyers, infographics showing nutritional benefits of fresh produce, photos of our volunteers working in the beds. I submitted the materials to Westwood Creative, careful not to use my home address. I used my office address at the nonprofit. 2 days later, I received a message. "Your portfolio is impressive. We'd like to schedule an initial meeting next Wednesday." I smiled, then closed my laptop. For the first time in months, I felt that flutter, the one I used to feel before presenting at a bake sale or speaking at a health fair. When Wednesday arrived, I put on my favorite navy sheath dress, simple, professional, fitted at the waist, and picked out a pair of low-heeled pumps in gray suede. My hair was styled in loose waves, and I wore minimal jewelry, just a silver pendant from my grandmother. I wanted to be myself, not hide behind anything. At the Westwood Creative office, I met Thomas, the creative director. He was tall, mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and a welcoming smile. He greeted me with a firm handshake and said, "Clara, pleased to meet you. We've heard great things about your work at the community garden." I blinked and asked, "How did you know?" He shrugged, smiling. Langston Development Group values authenticity. We ask for references. I realized instantly that I was working on my father's project, but it was through Westwood. Thomas led me to a glass conference room overlooking downtown Seattle, while I tried to steady my breath. We discussed timelines, budgets, and creative direction. I explained my design philosophy, using earthy tones, clear icons, approachable typography to convey nutrition information. He nodded thoughtfully and said, "Your approach aligns perfectly with what Dad envisions, making people feel that fresh food is accessible, not exclusive." I bit my lip at the mention of my father. "Does he know I'm leading this?" Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Not yet. He asked Westwood to find someone experienced in grassroots outreach. We assumed you worked for another agency here in Seattle. It's best they see the finished product first." My heart fluttered with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Over the next 3 weeks, I worked diligently. Every morning, I arrived at my small studio apartment at 7 a.m., brewed a cup of black coffee, and opened my laptop. I drafted layouts for posters, community newsletters, social media graphics. In the afternoons, I visited neighborhood centers to test designs with community members. Does this font feel friendly? Does this color scheme remind you of fresh produce? Their feedback helped me refine the materials until they felt both professional and personal. I sent weekly updates to Thomas, who responded with encouraging notes. "Love the progress, Clara. We're on track for the launch event. Meanwhile, my calendar filled with garden meetings in the evenings and mentoring sessions at the nonprofit. I balanced it all with a sense of gratitude I hadn't felt in years. Exactly 4 weeks later, on a crisp February morning, I received a final email. The Langston Development Group community outreach materials are approved. We'd like you to attend the launch event next Tuesday in Bellevue. Dress is business casual. Networking opportunity. My breath caught. A Bellevue event hosted by my father's company meant I'd see Dad, Mom, and perhaps even Brooke. I felt my hands tremble as I closed the email. I spent the rest of the day rehearsing my responses. If Dad asks how I got the job, I'll say Westwood recommended me. If he praises me, I'll accept graciously. If he says something cruel, I'll... What? I didn't know. But I knew I couldn't hide. I was proud of my work, and I'd let it speak for itself. Tuesday came with clear skies. I chose a tailored burgundy blazer over a black blouse and slim charcoal trousers. I kept my hair in a sleek bun and wore small pearl earrings. I wanted to project confidence, professionalism. In the Uber ride from my apartment, I reviewed my talking points. Emphasize community impact, highlight volunteer involvement, mention nutritional benefits. I practiced smiling in the rearview mirror until I felt steady. The event was in a glass atrium overlooking Lake Washington. White linen tablecloths draped long tables topped with hors d'oeuvres, mini quiches, crudité platters, sparkling, water infused with cucumber slices. A stage with a simple podium stood to one side, flanked by banners that read, "Langston develops healthy communities." I stepped into the atrium and felt a rush of nerves. People milling around turned to, "Look at me," offering polite nods. By the entrance, my mother hovered near a display table, comparing event programs. She saw me, her eyes widening in surprise and delight. She glided over, giving me a quick hug. "Clara, darling, you look radiant." I nodded and said, "Thank you. It's been a pleasure working on this project." She beamed, stepping back to glance at my name tag, which read, "Clara Mitchell, lead designer." She whispered, "Dad will be so proud." I swallowed, remembering his cold words at the brunch. I forced a smile and said, "I hope my work meets his expectations." I made my way toward the refreshment table, picking up a glass of sparkling water when I heard my father's voice behind me. "There's my talented daughter." He stepped into view, perfectly dressed in navy slacks and a cream-colored cashmere sweater. He paused to eye my name tag, then looked back at me. "You've done well. This event looks fantastic." His tone was measured, neither warm nor condescending. I thanked him and said, "It's all about community impact. I wanted people to feel that fresh food is within reach." He nodded slowly and said, "You're right." I could see my mother hovering behind him, tears in her eyes. She mouthed, "I'm so proud." I looked away, refocusing on the room. The event began with a brief speech by the executive director. She thanked Westwood Creative, introduced the materials, and called me to the stage. My heart pounded as I approached the podium. I adjusted the microphone and said, "Good evening. Thank you for being here. I'm honored to have designed the materials for this initiative. My goal was to create clear, inviting graphics to help community members learn about healthy eating and local resources." I clicked the remote, revealing slides showing the posters, bold greens and oranges, friendly icons of apples, carrots, and leafy greens. I explained how each design element aimed to communicate accessibility and inclusivity. As I spoke, I glimpsed Dad's expression, his eyebrows raised as if he hadn't expected me to speak with such confidence. My voice steadied with every detail I shared about gathering feedback from local residents, refining the typography, ensuring the materials were bilingual in English and Spanish. When I concluded, I said, "Thank you," and stepped back as the room erupted into polite applause. I felt my cheeks flush, but I held my head high as I descended from the stage. After the presentation, guests surrounded me. A Bellevue council member shook my hand and asked how long I'd been working on nutrition outreach. A local journalist asked for a quick quote about urban gardens. I answered each question with calm authority. Somewhere in the crowd, I could see my father, standing with a few of his colleagues, his expression inscrutable. I realized then that my absence hadn't erased me. It had made me stronger and more visible in a way Dad hadn't anticipated. Later that evening, as the event wound down, I found Daniel waiting for me near the exit. He took my hand and said, "You were amazing." I smiled, resting my forehead against his. He guided me to a small table by the window overlooking the lake. We sipped sparkling water as the last guests trickled out. Then I saw Dad approaching, with Mom and Brooke in tow. My heart fluttered, but I remained calm. "Clara," Dad began, folding his arms. "That was an impressive presentation." His tone was cool but respectful. "You certainly know how to command a room." I met his gaze and said, "Thank you." I wanted to make sure the message was clear. My mother reached for my hand, her eyes glistening. Brooke, standing beside them, looked simultaneously proud and surprised. Dad cleared his throat and said, "It's good to see you thriving, finding your path." I nodded and replied, "I've discovered that I can't thrive under certain expectations. I needed to step away to find out who I am." He frowned slightly, and I continued, "I appreciate that this initiative matters to the community, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute." There was a brief silence as Dad processed my words. Finally, he said, "I never expected you to be so successful outside the family framework." "Neither did I admitted, "but I found my voice when I stood on my own." His jaw tightened. "I suppose my wife, Brooke, and I have some catching up to do." I nodded. "If you're willing," I said quietly, "I'd like that." Dad looked at me for a long moment, then turned and said to my mother, "Shall we?" My mother squeezed my hand gently. Brooke gave me a quick hug, mouthing, "I'm proud." I watched them walk away into the crowd, struck by how much had changed. The next morning, I awoke to a text from Thomas. "Can you join us for breakfast? Dad wants to see the final printed materials before the launch." I took a deep breath and replied, "Of course." I chose a simple gray sweater and black slacks, tied my hair in a low ponytail, and drove to the Langston Development offices in Bellevue. The lobby gleamed with marble floors and velvet seating. As I entered, my father emerged from the executive wing, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him at family events. He shook my hand and said, "Morning. I wanted to thank you again for last night. The materials look great in print." We stepped into a private conference room where copies of the posters and newsletters lay spread across a table. I walked around, pointing out details: how the paper stock was chosen for recyclability, how the color palette matched seasonal produce. Dad nodded thoughtfully and said, "You've exceeded our expectations. This campaign will set a new standard." I felt a swell of pride. "I'm glad," I said. I wanted people to feel these resources were for them, not something they couldn't reach. He met my eyes and said, "You've shown us that family and business must evolve." I see that now. I thanked him, and as I turned to leave, he said, "Clara, if you ever reconsider joining us, the door is open." I paused in the doorway, feeling the weight of his offer. I turned back to him and said, "Thank you, Dad, but I need to continue on my own path. I appreciate everything you've built, though. It's given me a foundation to build mine." He nodded, a flicker of emotion in his eyes. I left the building, feeling both relief and gratitude. Relief that I'd finally spoken my truth, and gratitude that I'd earned his respect on my own terms. Over the next few weeks, the campaign launched successfully. Community centers posted the new posters in their lobbies. Our bilingual newsletters circulated in every neighborhood. Local news outlets ran features on the collaboration. Langston. Development's new outreach puts community first. I received emails from teachers who used our infographics in classrooms, from senior centers that displayed our flyers in waiting rooms, from parents who thanked me for showing healthy recipes and local produce availability. Each message felt like a confirmation that I'd truly made a difference. 6 months later, I sat with Daniel at our favorite coffee shop in Capitol Hill, the Seattle rain tapping gently against the windows. He stirred his latte and said, "Your name's everywhere." I smiled, sipping my cappuccino. "It feels good," I said, "to finally be visible for what I do, not for who I'm related to." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I knew you'd get here," he said softly. I glanced at him, tears welling in my eyes. "I nearly lost faith last year," I admitted, "but I found my voice by standing up to my family." He nodded. "And look at you now, leading initiatives, inspiring people." We both fell silent, letting the moment settle. I looked down at my journal resting on the table. On the cover, I'd written, "Sometimes you have to leave to find your place." I opened it to the last page and read the reflection I'd written that morning. Becoming isn't about forgetting where you come from. It's about honoring the lessons, good and bad, that shaped you. The opposite of being forgotten is finding the space where your true self can flourish. As I closed my journal, I noticed my phone buzzing with messages. An invitation to speak at a nutrition conference, a request from a local school to lead a workshop on community gardens, and a text from my mother. "Dinner in March? We'd love to see you." My breath caught, but I smiled. I typed back, "I'd love that," and set my phone down. I realized I was no longer afraid of being forgotten. I'd built something too meaningful to fade away. That evening, I returned to my apartment and poured myself a glass of wine. I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights dancing on the wet pavement. I thought about the path that led me here, the cinnamon rolls I baked, my father's cruel joke, the decision to leave, the year of rebuilding. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of peace. I disappeared from my family's story only to reappear in my own narrative, one where my values, my work, and my identity mattered. Have you ever had a moment when someone's words pushed you to make a life-changing decision? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that sometimes walking away is the strongest move you can make. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, your worth is never determined by those who fail to see it. Mes andemo, pike.